Elasticity is a concept which is related to what happens with demand and supply, and also in relation to the way that consumer behaviour in fact dictates how price and quantity are affected when there's a change in price. So when we talk about elasticity, the concept itself simply says that we can move from a number of areas which range from perfectly elastic through to perfectly inelastic. And if you think about the meaning of elasticity, or elastic even in just normal English, elastic means that something will stretch, move, have a fairly significant movement. Whereas if something is inelastic, it tends to be, if you like, brittle, or there is less movement. It is less likely that you can get a large movement from it. So when we think about these, this is what we're talking about in relation to the way the markets work. So if you think about different sorts of products, and we're talking about what happens to the quantity of goods such as substitutes or inferior goods in relation to a change in a particular condition, whether it be disposable income or a change in input costs, the effect of that price on how much a consumer is prepared to take of that particular product. So to bear this in mind, if we start off, what we'll do is set up a small table that says that the worst case scenario is perfectly inelastic, and we move from perfectly inelastic to what we call relatively inelastic, to what we know as unitary elastic, to relatively elastic, to the last one, which is perfectly elastic. Now, in terms of measurement, for each of these, we can actually say at perfectly inelastic, we're saying that it is equal to 0, and shortly on a graph we'll show how this actually works. Relatively inelastic, we say, is somewhere between 1 and 0. So it has to be less than 1. So when I said 1, if you take it as less than 1, because unitary elastic is equal to 1. At that point, the difference is that if there's a price rise of 10%, then we would expect the quantity of the good to move in exactly the same proportion. So price rise of 10%, we'll see a quantity movement of 10%, and this can be either plus or minus depending on what's occurred. The relatively elastic takes us then to something greater than 1, and perfectly elastic says it's pretty difficult to actually measure, so we assign the term infinity to it. So let's look at how this actually works in terms of a graph. If we look at those, we see that if you think for me, starting from the top of the list that you saw, we had perfectly inelastic. So if it's perfectly inelastic, we're saying that the price is not going to change much in relation to quantities. So a straight line, and I should reverse what I said there. I'm sorry, I should have said to you that the quantity will in fact not change as the price changes, and you can see how that might occur because I have a straight line. Therefore, the quantity is not going to change. It will always stay there, but the price point can move anywhere along here, and you can see that it doesn't matter what I do. It's telling me that a consumer is in fact going to take whatever the market can provide at that point, because it must be something that's needed. On the other hand, on the same graph, if we actually draw the infinitesimal measurement, so that was where we said it was perfectly elastic, you can see that the curve is a flat line. So in this case, if you move the price, then the quantity is in fact going to move anywhere along here. So if for argument's sake we were to actually take the price up, what would occur is that you would see, do you remember, a contraction back along here. Whereas if we moved it down a fraction, then there would be an expansion all the way along here. So the two concepts relate to opposite ends of the spectrum. When we think about the others, if we use a separate graph to talk about those, then unitary elastic probably looks a little bit like this. It's not quite a straight line, but it's as close to as you can get. And it simply says that proportionately what's going to happen along here is that the quantity will move in exactly the same proportion as the price is moved, either upward or downward. So if we stick all those together, you can see that we have a variation of quite a few things. So the concept is telling us that anywhere through, if you like, using these three graphs, there is some point which you can take for elasticity that will move from perfectly inelastic through various stages to perfectly elastic, and on the way through we've come up also with the unitary elastic. So the concept is showing us what's going to occur, and as you go through and we talk about these particular aspects of the different types of elasticity, these will become clearer.